Firstly, because my father's family came from this part of Scotland. Secondly, because my husband and I are lucky enough to spend precious time.
There are secrets buried so deep within the walls of ancient institutions that they become part of the foundation itself, hidden beneath layers of protocol, propriety, and the careful smiles worn for public consumption. But even the most carefully guarded truths have a way of walking into the light, dragged forth not by scandal-hungry outsiders, but by those who love too deeply to remain silent any longer. What happened behind closed doors, in the quiet moments between official engagements and carefully orchestrated family portraits, was a pattern of cruelty so subtle, so expertly concealed beneath the veneer of concern and familial duty, that it took years for anyone to recognize it for what it truly was: the victim. A child born into extraordinary circumstances and burdened with expectations no young soul should bear, endured with a grace that belied her tender years, never complaining, never seeking sympathy, always protecting those she loved from the truth that would shatter them. The perpetrator moved with the confidence of someone who believed herself untouchable, protected by position and the assumption that her version of events would always carry more weight than the observations of a child or the suspicions of those deemed less important. She wielded words like surgical instruments, each comment calibrated to wound without leaving visible scars, each gesture of dismissal designed to erode confidence while maintaining plausible deniability. To the outside world, she played her role impeccably: the devoted grandmother figure, the supportive family member, the woman who had overcome her own complicated history to claim her place in an institution that had once rejected her. But beneath that carefully constructed facade lived something far darker, a resentment that festered and found its target in the most innocent of victims. When the truth finally emerged, it did so with the force of a dam breaking, carrying with it years of accumulated pain, witnessed cruelties, and the testimonies of those who had watched in helpless horror as a child was systematically diminished. And once William knows the truth, nothing will ever be the same. The afternoon light filtering through the windows of Kensington Palace held that peculiar quality of late autumn, thin, gray, and somehow exhausted, as though the sun itself had grown weary of illuminating the world. Prince William sat in his private study, a room lined with leather-bound books and family photographs that told the official story of his life, the one carefully curated for public consumption. His hands trembled slightly as he held the envelope that had been delivered, not through official channels, but pressed directly into his hand by someone who had served his family for more than 2 decades, someone whose loyalty was beyond question, and whose distress had been evident in every line of her aged face. She had said nothing when she gave it to him, only met his eyes with an expression of such profound sorrow that his chest had tightened. Even before he opened the seal, the letter inside was not anonymous, though he had half expected it to be. It bore the signature of Margaret Thornsby, his daughter Charlotte's former nanny, a woman of impeccable discretion, who had left their service 18 months earlier under circumstances he now realized he had never properly questioned. The paper trembled in his grip as he read the carefully composed lines, each sentence a revelation that struck him like a physical blow. Margaret detailed not rumors or suspicions, but witnessed events, specific incidents she had observed over the 3 years she had cared for his children, moments when she had been present, but dismissed as merely part of the household furniture, invisible in the way that staff so often are to those accustomed to being served. She wrote of comments made just loud enough to be overheard, of deliberate exclusions from family gatherings, of subtle undermining disguised as grandmotherly concern, and always, the target had been Charlotte. William's breathing grew shallow as he read about the Christmas morning when Charlotte, then only 7 years old, had proudly shown her grandmother a watercolor she had painted, only to hear Camilla remark within the child's hearing that some children simply don't inherit artistic talent, no matter their lineage. He read about the afternoon tea where Charlotte had been seated at the far end of the table, physically separated from the other grandchildren, while Camilla lavished attention on her biological grandchildren, creating a geography of favoritism that required no words to understand. The letter described Charlotte's 9th birthday celebration, where Camilla had arrived late and departed early, pausing only to comment that some birthdays are more important than others in a tone that transformed a child's special day into something forgettable. Each incident, taken alone, might have seemed insignificant, the kind of minor slight that families navigate daily, but woven together, they formed a tapestry of deliberate, sustained cruelty directed at a child whose only offense was existing in a position that reminded Camilla daily of the woman who had come before her, the beloved Diana whose ghost still walked these halls and lived in Charlotte's cornflower blue eyes. The terrible cleverness of it was that Camilla had never left evidence that could be definitively proven as malicious. She had been too strategic for that, too aware of how institutions protect themselves by demanding irrefutable proof. Before acknowledging uncomfortable truths, she had operated in the gray spaces of interpretation, where a comment could be defended as concern, an exclusion explained as scheduling difficulty, a cutting remark reframed as unfortunate phrasing rather than intentional cruelty. But Margaret's letter included something that transcended individual incidents, a pattern, witnessed and documented by someone who had spent years observing the family's private moments. Attached to the letter were diary entries, kept not for any sinister purpose, but as part of Margaret's professional practice of maintaining detailed records of the children's daily lives, medical needs, and emotional states. Those entries, written in real time, without knowledge of how significant they would become, painted a devastating picture of a child growing increasingly withdrawn, anxious, and convinced of her own inadequacy under the steady drip of her step-grandmother's disdain. William sat in the gathering darkness, the letter still clutched in hands that had gone numb, holding evidence that would tear the family apart. The incidents Margaret documented began in the spring of 2022, shortly after the Platinum Jubilee celebrations, when the public had witnessed what they believed was a unified royal family, presenting a united front to the world. Behind the scenes, in the private quarters at Windsor Castle on May 15th of that year, Camilla had encountered 9-year-old Charlotte practicing her curtsy. In preparation for a formal dinner, the child, taking her responsibilities seriously as she had been taught, was focused on perfecting the precise angle and duration appropriate for greeting foreign dignitaries. Camilla had watched in silence for several moments before remarking, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "Your grandmother Diana was a natural at this from the very beginning. Some people are simply born with grace, while others must work terribly hard to approximate it." The words had landed exactly as intended, not as encouragement for Charlotte's diligent practice, but as a comparison designed to highlight inadequacy, to plant the seed that no matter how hard she tried, she would never measure up to the impossible standard of a grandmother she had never met, but whose legend she could never escape. 3 months later, on August 3rd, during the family's summer gathering at Balmoral, an incident occurred that multiple staff members witnessed but none, until Margaret, had felt empowered to report. Charlotte had been suffering from a stomach ailment, nothing serious, but uncomfortable enough that she had missed the morning's planned activities. When she finally emerged in the afternoon, still pale and clearly not fully recovered, Catherine had kept her close, monitoring her condition with the fierce protectiveness that defined her motherhood. Camilla had approached them in the drawing room, where Charlotte sat quietly with a book, and announced with theatrical concern that fragile children need to toughen up if they expect to manage the demands of royal life, adding that constant coddling does them no favors. In the long run, the implication was clear to everyone who heard it. Catherine was raising a weak child, and Charlotte's illness was somehow a failure of character rather than simple childhood biology. Catherine had stiffened, her composure remaining intact through sheer force of will, while Charlotte had absorbed the criticism with the terrible comprehension children possess, understanding that her body's betrayal had somehow marked her as deficient. The pattern intensified during the autumn of 2023, particularly round significant family milestones that should have been celebrations, but became instead opportunities for Camilla to reassert subtle dominance. On October 12th, when Charlotte performed in her school's Harvest Festival concert, standing on stage to sing a solo verse she had practiced for weeks, the entire family had been invited to attend. William and Catherine sat in the front row, their pride evident in every smile and encouraging nod. Camilla arrived 20 minutes late, her entrance during Charlotte's performance drawing attention and disrupting the child's concentration at the crucial moment. Afterward, while other family members rushed to congratulate Charlotte on her beautiful performance, Camilla offered only a brief pat on the shoulder and the O. The evening of October 17, 2024, began like countless family dinners before its formal place settings in the private dining room at Kensington Palace, the soft glow of candlelight reflecting off inherited silver, and the careful orchestration of conversation designed to maintain the illusion of familial harmony. King Charles and Camilla had joined William and Catherine for what was meant to be a quiet family meal, an attempt at normalcy in lives defined by ceremony and scrutiny. Charlotte and her brothers were present, dressed appropriately for dinner with the king, their behavior impeccable as always, little soldiers of propriety trained from birth in the art of performance. The conversation flowed through safe topics: upcoming engagements, Charlotte's recent school achievements, Louis's enthusiasm for rugby, George's growing understanding of his future role. Everything proceeded according to script, until a single comment detonated the carefully maintained peace. Catherine had mentioned, with obvious maternal pride, that Charlotte had won the regional academic competition. Margaret had once noted in her diary that she had not only participated but excelled, defeating students from schools with far greater resources and reputations. Charlotte had blushed at the attention, clearly uncomfortable with praise, but also unable to hide a small smile of justified pride at her accomplishment. William had raised his glass in a toast to his daughter, and even Charles had offered warm congratulations. And then Camilla, with that particular smile that everyone had learned to recognize, but no one had challenged, had set down her fork and said with apparent concern, "How wonderful, Charlotte. Though I do hope all this academic focus isn't making you too serious. Young girls need to remember that success in life comes from being charming and agreeable, not just clever. Your grandmother Diana understood the importance of being liked rather than respected. It's a lesson that served her well. You don't want her to become one of those intense, unlikable women who frighten people with their competence, do you?" The silence that followed was absolute, the kind of quiet that precedes earthquakes or the moment before glass shatters. Charlotte's face had gone completely white. The achievement she had worked so hard for transformed in seconds into evidence of a personality flaw, another way she was failing to meet standards that shifted whenever she approached them. William felt the words like a physical assault, each phrase carefully chosen to wound the comparison to Diana weaponized as criticism, the implication that intelligence was a social liability, the suggestion that his daughter's considerable gifts were somehow making her unlikable, and beneath it all, the unmistakable message that Charlotte needed to diminish herself to be acceptable. Something fundamental shifted in that moment, a tectonic plate of patience and benefit of the doubt that William had extended for years, suddenly giving way to the molten rage that had been building beneath the surface. Before he could formulate a response that wouldn't constitute a direct confrontation with his father's wife, a voice spoke from the periphery of the room, firm and clear despite the obvious fear driving it. Margaret Thornsby, who had left royal service 18 months earlier, but who had been invited this evening, at Charlotte's special request to celebrate the academic victory, could not remain silent one moment longer. "With respect, Your Majesty," she said, addressing Camilla directly, her voice trembling but determined. "That is neither appropriate nor fair to say to a child who has done nothing but work hard and excel. And it is far from the first such comment you have made to Princess Charlotte over the years." The room seemed to inhale collectively. Staff members frozen in their serving positions, family members turning in slow motion to process this unprecedented breach of protocol. Margaret herself appearing shocked by her own audacity, but also resolved to continue now that the first words had been spoken. Camilla's expression transformed from pleasant surprise to cold fury in the span of a heartbeat. "I beg your pardon," she said, her tone making clear that this was not a request for clarification, but a warning that the speaker had crossed a line from which there would be no return. But Margaret, having broken the seal of silence, could not stop the flood of testimony that followed. "I have spent 3 years watching you systematically undermine a child who has done nothing to earn your contempt, she continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. I have documented incidents, kept records, witnessed cruelties disguised as concern or guidance. Your Highness has been excluded from family gatherings, compared unfavorably to impossible standards, criticized for successes and failures alike, and made to feel inadequate in ways that have damaged her mental health and sense of self-worth. And it has been deliberate, calculated, and sustained. The weight of betrayal filled the air, thick enough to choke on. William found himself on his feet without conscious decision, his chair scraping back with a violence that sent a clear message about his state of mind. Catherine had moved to Charlotte, who sat frozen in her seat, tears streaming silently down her face as years of private suffering became suddenly, horrifyingly public. George and Louis watched with wide eyes, too young to fully comprehend the adult dynamics erupting around them, but old enough to understand that something fundamental was breaking. And Charles sat in terrible silence, his face reflecting the dawning horror of a man realizing he had been blind to something happening in his presence, to someone he loved. This is absurd, Camilla said, her voice sharp with indignation and something that might have been fear. I have shown nothing but affection to all the children. If this woman has some grievance from her employment, it should be addressed through proper channels, not with wild accusations during a family dinner. But her denial rang hollow against Margaret's detailed testimony, and the longer she spoke, the more other witnesses found their voices. A junior staff member mentioned the Christmas morning incident with the watercolor. One of the household managers recalled the birthday celebration, and Camilla's pointed early departure. The pieces assembled themselves into an undeniable pattern before Charles could dismiss them as misunderstanding or miscommunication. And then Charlotte herself spoke, her voice small but steady, carrying the terrible authority of truth that no longer feared exposure. She's right, Papa, she said, looking directly at her grandfather for the first time since the confrontation began. I didn't want anyone to know because I thought it would make things harder for everyone. I thought if I tried hard enough to be good enough, she might like me. But she doesn't want to like me. She wants me to know I'm not really part of the family, that I'm just someone who reminds her of things she wishes she could forget. The words dropped like stones into still water, ripples spreading outward to touch everyone present. Charlotte continued, no longer crying, but somehow beyond tears. In that place of exhausted honesty, where pretense becomes impossible, she told me once, when no one else was listening, that I would never be more than Diana's pale shadow, that everyone would spend my whole life comparing me to someone I can never be, and finding me wanting. She said it would be easier for everyone if I learned to be invisible, to take up less space, to need less attention. So that's what I've been trying to do. I've been trying to disappear. The chaos that erupted in the wake of Charlotte's confession was both immediate and devastating. William's voice, when he finally found it, was cold with a fury that required no volume to convey its intensity. You have spent years tormenting my daughter, he said, addressing Camilla with none of the deference protocol demanded, speaking to her as William the father rather than William the future king. You have used your position to systematically destroy a child's confidence and sense of security within her own family, and you did it where I couldn't see it, where her mother couldn't protect her, in the spaces between official moments when everyone believed we were building family unity. Catherine was shaking with suppressed rage, her arms wrapped protectively around Charlotte, her face reflecting a mother's ultimate nightmare that she had failed to protect her child from harm. Occurring in plain sight, Charles attempted to restore order, to suggest they discuss this privately, to extend the possibility that there had been misunderstandings rather than deliberate cruelty. But William cut through every attempt at diplomatic resolution with the simple, devastating question, Father, do you believe your granddaughter is lying about her own experience? Do you believe all these witnesses are conspiring to create a false narrative? Or do you believe that the woman you married has been hurting Charlotte, and you simply didn't want to see it? The question hung in the air, unanswerable in any way that didn't require Charles to choose between his wife and his moral compass, between institutional stability and the well-being of a child who deserved his protection. Camilla made one final attempt to control the narrative, to reframe her actions as misunderstood guidance from someone trying to prepare Charlotte for the harsh realities of royal life. But her words found no purchase against the accumulated testimony of witnesses and the undeniable evidence of Charlotte's psychological distress. Other family members began recalling incidents they had previously dismissed, small moments that suddenly took on new significance when viewed as part of a pattern rather than isolated misunderstandings.